This is my second video on the series of exegesis, and here we're going to talk about the first step of exegesis, that of surveying the text. So when you begin to do exegesis on a passage, the first thing you want to do is get the lay of the land. That is, you want to kind of familiarize yourself with what it is you're going to be reading so that you're aware of the key aspects of the text. So when you begin to really dig into it, you'll have an idea of where you are. An analogy that we can think of is that of the first time you come into a website, you look for the header bars, you'll look for where the search box is, where the pictures may be, and so on before you really dig into the actual reading or the shopping that you're doing on a website. So as you begin to survey the text, the first thing you want to do is read the passage. Now ignore the section headers, actually ignore the verse markers too, the numbers that mark the verses. Those were added in hundreds of years later, and so even that can sometimes shape our understanding of the text in ways that aren't necessarily fruitful. You might also want to try and read it aloud. These texts were originally often had oral histories and often were meant to be read out in public, and so hearing it can help you understand it and catch some of the nuances, some of the phrases that are repeated, and so on. You may also want to look at it in context. Look at the sections that come before the passage and after the passage and see how it ties together with those, and so on. Now, as you begin to read, begin to note your observations and questions. That is, what's going on here? What's the role of the text? What's the historical and cultural context both of the writer and the audience? And it's always important to think about who the audience is, because writers write for audiences. So who's hearing this? What might be their interest, and so on? What's the form, the genre that you're dealing with? What are the contents, and so on? It may help sometimes to read a brief introduction to that particular book of the Bible if you're not familiar with that Bible or that book. But at the same time, don't read a lot or even any commentary at first. You really want to make your own impression, your own first impression on this text before you dig into what other people have to say. Now what that means is that you want to begin from this survey, get a working thesis. That is, off your initial impressions, what do you think the topic is? What's the perspective it's offering? What role does it play in the book as a whole? Now note, all this is going to be educated guessing because you haven't really dealt with the experts or the people who've written about this, but that's really okay. You want to develop your own understanding of this before you dig into other people's. And also think about how your own context impacts your understanding. One of the real problems that most of us have is we're modern. We come up in this modern scientific worldview in America, and that can shape the kind of questions that we ask and so on. So you need to kind of be clear about what questions you're bringing to the text, perhaps so that you can step away from them. Now once you get a working thesis, you might want to jot it down. So this isn't just a series of facts, but what are all the observations that contribute to the overall interpretation of a text as a whole? A great way of thinking about this is almost like the way a physician or a nurse makes a diagnosis of a patient. You're going to look at all aspects of the patient's health, the context where they're living, and so on before one makes a diagnosis, which means that even there, of course, even in the medical field, there's going to be a variety of interpretations. Now, some are going to be excluded. If somebody comes in with a broken arm, you don't suggest perhaps that they've got a gunshot wound. But there'll be a lot of interpretations, but still some that are excluded. And then as you think about your thesis, you want to think, well, what's your claim that you're making about this text? What have you concluded? That's what a good thesis is. So a survey of the text then, to conclude, gives you this overview of the text, gives you an initial thesis, which you'll then be able to go back and revise as you begin to continue on in your exegesis. And we'll talk about the next steps in videos to come.